Alright, I'm going to have a beer, Irish bastard, and answer this video. Well, I may not put the link. It's various videos I've been answering from this week by Hythliday. Now, as a reference point, I'm going to be talking about this film strip. Our life, all of the information that we have, whatever it consists of to have the experience of a life, is in a film strip. And it's multi-track. It's not just this kind of image, it's also audio images, sounds, it's tactile images, tactile sensations, and so on. Multi-track, your hunger, fear, every feeling, emotion, frames in a film strip. That is our data set that we're talking about when we're talking about a whole life. Me right now, it's this film strip going back. And remember, when you were young, things weren't so clear. I guess the young part's over here. Things weren't so clear, very impressionistic. And that's a limit too. It's not like everything you experience, it's everything you manage to, collect, keep track of. Okay, so I think it wasn't the last video, but it happened for some reason to be the latest one I watched. There was a lot of complaint, Hythliday, about my saying that there is a specialness to the first person perspective, and I am saying that. And perhaps it's open how special it is, but the specialness I'm talking about is its fundamental character. It is the data set. Whatever you conclude about the so-called universe, you're going to use that data set. You don't have access to my data set. There's a lot of data you don't have access to, but you can still make conclusions based on your own particular data set. So when I explain that, no doubt that's why you say, oh, it's like he's saying there's something special about it. It's in every piece of every consideration that we can ever make. It's all the data. So you can't just have no explanation for it and say, well, I don't want to think about that. I want to think about the external world. I've deduced there's an external world. That's the important thing. That's what really exists. Because you've concluded that from this data set. So for the external world to exist, the data set has to exist. And ultimately, of course, you admit it exists. Right? But you want to say, since I've explained it, it's mechanical. Well, everything's mechanical if you're going to include plumbing systems, electrical circuits. If that counts as mechanical, everything's mechanical. Sometimes mechanical doesn't mean that, like electromechanical. The mechanical part is the part that turns, and the electric part is the part that has a current. But if everything counts as mechanical, like physics, what I think of as mechanical is like a clock. But I don't think a clock has an internal experience. I don't think a clock has a film strip. I think it just operates. You can observe that behavior, but I don't think it has. My guess is it doesn't have an internal experience. It's an important question. Which kind of things have an internal experience? Now, I think the easy answer is living things. That seems the most obvious. The behavior of living things seems different from the behavior of a clock in precisely a way related to having some sort of an internal film strip with a different number of tracks, right? Different feelings than us. Dimmer, sharper in some respects, right? Like bats have really good hearing or whatever. Or they have echolocation, which is like vision through hearing. Hard to know, but arguably their internal experience is significantly different, but that they have one, that's the similarity. That seems like the easy thing is to go with life. But if not, fine. It's something else. But when you say, when we're talking about the human cognition and feeling like we have will, feeling like we make choices, I don't think you can, ignore the 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 difference that it has from a clock mechanism. So using a metaphor of a clock mechanism, or else you have to be open to the idea that a clock mechanism also, if it's just like, well, mechanisms, it's just one of the things mechanisms do. Well, we have a lot of mechanisms, and I guess then you'd be committed to saying they all have internal experiences. Any kind of a reason of why we do, well, because it works better that way, and well, the clock would work better too if it could repair itself and have an attitude about keeping healthy. But I don't think that it does. This issue that you said about what it feels like to be a human and how somehow that's secondary, my point is it's inherently primary. This happens first. Before we even start philosophizing, before we know our mother's name, we've got this flow of frames. Even the frames, of course, is a metaphor. It's a flow of information. There's streams of information. You can separate it into frames. But it's a flow of information, I guess, coming from the sun. And it's primary. Everything you know about this objective third-person world, which I also believe in, I merely acknowledge it comes from data in here, right? So what it feels like to have the data flow, that happens way before any theory about an external world. So in order to think about the external world, you have to accept this. If you want to think, because if you don't accept this, then everything you think about the external world, invalid. You think you found an a priori truth of cause and effect, the law of identity. You found an a priori truth. Yeah, you found it in here. We know you found it in here. If you were in a coma from the day you were born, you would never have found any a priori candidates of the law of identity. Right? And when you woke up, you would have to start learning how to do things like see. Right? It would be very basic what you would be starting out. So what it feels like to experience life is very important, right? But the hard problem is the question of how is it possible that it feels like something? Because you and I believe, a flow of chemicals. How is it possible for a flow of chemicals, if it's just like a clock with gears, to have the internal experience unless the clock has one too? I don't think the clock has one, but I don't know. Maybe, but I don't really think so. I think it's more likely the metal in the clock would have it, and the wood in the clock would have it in some dim way than the clock itself. Or maybe that's all the same likelihood, but the behavior difference makes me think that, well, a paramecium has life and an internal dialogue, and the clock doesn't. So, having said that, right, I want to repeat, as far as I'm concerned, determinism is an open question. We're discussing it. Willpower, which parts are elusive? Because we know willpower is elusive. I've used this example before. I saw it when I was young. People, including adults and kids, like when there's a demo of a video game, I've tried it. You can play that, right? Watch this ship's going along down the cave and you're missing things. Because you go up, you can think you're controlling it because every time you want it to go up, you push up, it goes up. It might be off a half second or something, but it goes up. And you feel, especially if it's exceeding you feel like you were controlling it. If it fails when you thought, hey, I swerved out of the way, you might notice more. And that's an example of where it feels like you're willing the reaction, but in reality, it's random. You're still willing in that case, but the fact that you thought it was connected to what you saw shows that there can be a disconnection there. In other words, it could be that the life is determined and the brain is just the thing that explains why you chose to do the things your body did during that experience, right? So determinism is an open question. If the reality of willpower, how elusive it is, if the choice is a real thing that can happen, that is also an open question, and it has to be, right? Because we're debating that. We can't be debating it if it's not considered an open question to a certain degree. You don't think it's open. You've closed your answer, and I think my answer is more open. But I closed it in the sense that I'm pretty much siding on it's a real phenomenon. And even if it's things are determined and choices are all illusion, it's still a fundamental importance why some things have this data stream. Because only things with this data stream can make a theory about what may or may not be a priori, or what a priori means. I think, for example, a clock or an avalanche or a river does not have a film strip of its own. So it has no way to make those theories. This is a fundamental question about will. It ensures that whatever turns out with the will in terms of its freedom or lack thereof, if the freedom or lack is absolute. Now, I don't think either are absolute. But however it turns out, we know that the universe we live in is still this one, and it seems like it's working. So there's some sort of compatibilism where, okay, it's fake, you make no choices, but you feel like you do. And explaining that is still fundamental to the questions that we're asking about willpower, right? So, and a theme to this is the value of using your willpower, right? If you were to do an experiment and there's some habit you want to change, it's like, I like baths, I want to keep taking baths, but I shouldn't take 4-hour baths. I think maybe I'm using baths as an escapism. And you can try not doing anything mentally about that, or you can try, I'm going to remind myself after a half an hour that I want to get out soon, and find that you start getting out at an hour. You would say, well, yeah, but making that decision was predetermined. Well, right, okay. If we've still done experiments, if everything is predetermined, people can still do or not do experiments. And I'm saying if you do that experiment and try it out, do an experiment about what the result is, you can say, well, you weren't really choosing to do the experiment. It was fated in the sense, well, no. In that case, that's what it means to make a choice, is to face one of those situations where you wonder what you're going to do and then you pretend that you decided to do what was inevitable. There are a lot of people that will benefit and be stronger emotionally. They will feel better emotionally if they exercise their will. And they will find if they exercise their will gets stronger and stronger. And if determinism is true, and the strength of the will is not really something related, it doesn't, a strong will seems to increase the number of choices you have realistically available to you. But if that's an illusion, right, you're still going to find out that pursuing that illusion creates a better situation for yourself. And so if that's an illusion that you're making that choice, it doesn't mean you shouldn't make that choice. You still should try to make that choice. Why would that be necessary? I don't see a reason. I think that choices has something to do with the fact that the universe has more possibilities than what happened, and we can select. So not anything is possible. I can't just start flying right now, but I can stop this video now or keep going, right? You disagree, but that's the open question. And the reason I'm saying this hard problem is not something you can escape is because one, determinism doesn't allow you to escape it. This is still a weird phenomenon here, this internal, a clock with an internal stream of consciousness, right? And two, willpower has a certain automatic compatibilism because of the universe we're already experiencing. If it turns out willpower is an illusion, it's going to be one of those illusions of like, yeah, well, it's built in. It's like the illusion that there's three primary colors. That's just because of our eyes and brain. We know that. Other animals have different primary colors, right? That's just a processing artifact. Uh, but there's no other way to see images. That's the way we see them. It's a cross section of reality, a subset of reality, an interpretation of reality. And that's so we weren't supposed to be infinitely minded. If willpower turns out to be a similar illusion, um, I feel that I am open to that. But I don't think it's fair for you to say you can ignore this because we're mechanistic. Mechanistic things don't seem to have an internal consciousness. So when you say we're mechanistic and so you don't want to look at that, it's actually a stronger argument that maybe we're not mechanistic because mechanisms don't have this, right? But I'm okay with calling us mechanistic. Just remember that pressure systems, electrical systems, radiation systems, electrons in graphite, these are mechanisms. So it's not just gears, BBs, and chains. It's pressure and waves and all kinds of reflective and shimmering kinds of effects. Okay, so let's see the other side. You advocated seeking truth as an end in itself. I believe in that. Nietzsche talked about that as, the sign of a philosopher, especially given that it's never been proven to be a fruitful activity. I think we've seen it is a fruitful activity, but not purely benign, but because of technology and whatnot, but also other things. For example, we know how to lower infant mortality and stuff. We have a lot of knowledge that came from seeking truth about it. People are still in denial, I think, about these truths. I think that's just where we are in history. But I don't think it's possible to actually claim that truth is some pure goal. I think there are emotions related to truth, like eureka. I've had that feeling before. Oh my God, eureka! It feels really good. You figured something out. I figured something out that was really important to me. I've had the opposite of that where it's like, wait, that's more confusing than I realized before. What? You figure out eureka. Curiosity. These are emotions about wanting to find the truth. The brain has emotions about wanting to find the truth, just like it has emotions about the shapes that it notices. So the claim that truth is a good goal in itself, I think you're not facing that we have emotional drives towards that. For example, people that don't have those emotional drives and don't seek truth as much as a result, we might have to understand that it's just a biological situation that they're in, right? As opposed to judging them like they could do differently, which neither you or I believe. People have the freedom to do whatever. They're constrained, by their own brain, of course. So seeking the truth in itself is something I advocate, but it's somewhat rhetorical, right? Because to seek truth, you're seeking those emotional moments of, oh, yeah, wow. And you can have those and be wrong. We know that from Gary, for example. We know you can go, aha, I figured out how to work, and you could be wrong. So all thinking is useful emotionally to the person that's doing it. It might be destructive as well, but they're doing it because it's giving them something, perhaps a negative emotion, that they become perhaps addicted to, or at least that they desire, or that's familiar, that they know how to get. Right? Maybe it's the only emotion they can control or go to for freebies. So you and I both agree that the will is elusive. That some portion of it is an illusion. And to a degree, you could say all of it. All of it has some sort of an illusion. And that seems obvious to me. We're um, our self-images are wrong, and people often blame the individual, like, because we want to have a super positive self-image. No, plenty of pessimists and whatnot have overly negative self-images. It's not just a matter of being honest with yourself. I've started being honest with myself about my self-images decades ago. That doesn't mean that it's easy to figure out what you think of yourself. And you still have reason to think, well, what do other people think? Because if you don't think, what do other people think of me? Then, you might be an asshole, or just you might be annoying other people with a habit you don't really need to have around them, or whatever. You want the knowledge of, and it's hard to figure out. It's hard to calculate. Arguably likely to be incalculable. So I think most of will is an illusion, in that our brain is reacting and doing something, and we're explaining why it was a good idea, right? Most of the conscious mind, I think, is not doing the willing. The part that says, I think I'll get a biscuit, is not really deciding to get a biscuit. I think that we're a colony, our brain is a colony of eukaryotic cells, and they're all going together. Hey, let's have a biscuit, 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 biscuit. Hey, a biscuit, a biscuit. Oh, the biscuit, a biscuit, biscuit, a biscuit. We should get a biscuit. And that's all silent. And right at the end, when they're all yelling biscuit, our conscious mind, which is just a little part that's there to be the front man, to be the figurehead, says, oh, I'm forming an idea. I think I'll get a biscuit, right? So that conscious mind, not nearly as willful as it seems, but the rest of the brain in that neural network communication that wanted a biscuit because they were all starting to feel a little low blood sugar, or whatever would make you want a biscuit. We don't have enough gluten, or whatever. Those did do the will, and that counts. Our will is this collective will of a colony, and not just the neurons, but because all the hormones and everything else. But as far as we know, the whole body counts, contributing to this expression up to our conscious mind, which tries to wrap it up in a little thing. So that idea of a little thing consciousness, boom, here's our one consciousness. I believe that's a total illusion. That's the illusion that makes us think too that we might have a soul. Look, how could that go away? It's not connected to our body. But what's really going on is there's all these little pixels of consciousness. And this consciousness is an image of it, a lower resolution image of all those little pixels. But the little pixels really are willing. That's what I think. So I don't think it's fair for you to say there's no hard problem for you because it's mechanistic. I would challenge you, just as just a rhetorical challenge, to put it succinctly. I'm sure you get the part where it's more subtle. You can answer however you like. But if there's no hard problem, then you need to tell me if you think a clock or a river or a hurricane also has an internal experience. Those are mechanical as well, right? As a sub question, I'm curious, right? Just to be clear, because mechanisms is pool balls and gears often, wires, chains. I want to make sure that if we're saying everything is mechanistic, then that includes, ocean waves or mechanisms, right? And plumbing is a mechanism, not just the faucets, but the water in the pipe is a mechanism, is mechanistic, right? In other words, if mechanism means physics, yeah, but that's a point at which you don't know what a mechanism. Maybe clocks do have an internal experience. It'd be hard to know. They have no way to express it to us, so certainly would be hard to know. Disney cartoons seem to think they do. So saying it's mechanistic can only lead to a conclusion if we know what mechanistic means. We have no mechanism for the internal experience. There's no mechanism for any experience, any idea of things having experience. There's only mechanism for things happening. The metaphor then stops. There is no mechanism for why a waterfall has an internal experience. And we're just a waterfall of chemical reactions, just a cyclic chemical reaction like a river is a cyclic, pressure and volume reaction that's rolling and rolling. So the question is, what clockwork function, what function, what part of a clock mechanism, of a mechanism like that, would you relate to internal perceptions? Because even this video camera, and then the video is going into my computer, and I don't think my computer, even though it's got a full, definitely enough resolution, all the information, it's got the cycles and all these kinds of cognitive things that we've been able to program into the computer out of our brain. But what mechanism there would mean there was an internal perception? I can't see any, right? And yet we have one. And that's where we start on our quest to learn things. We start from this data set, and yet there's no mechanism for that. So when you say it's mechanistic, I don't have to answer that question. Well, you're ignoring an awful lot. And then you say, hey, the stuff left over after I'm ignoring the fundamental stuff I experience, I don't see any willpower. Well, yeah, if you ignore the fact that 90 times a day you're making tiny decisions, and a million times a day you're making a lot more implicit decisions. Well, if you ignore all those decisions, yeah, you don't see the decisions. So I'm saying that you can't ignore it because this is your whole data set. You can't ignore the raw data. You take raw data and you clean up, like in astronomy. You take raw data, you clean up. There's all kinds of things. There's bad places on the CCD, and you can smooth those out. You subtract the sky because you can take a picture nearby and you can get the sky. There's all ways you can clean up the image, and actually you're scientifically increasing the signal to noise ratio. You can reduce the noise out. There's various ways. You reduce these backgrounds and things out. You can look just at the signal and you get a very crisp image, and you go, this is what's really out there, right? That spot that's on the lens of the camera, that's not real. I know how to take that out. Why? How do I know how to take it out? Because it's in every picture that I take, right? I could take a picture of the dome, which is flat and smooth, and I'll see what the pattern is, so I can remove it from the pictures I take of the sky. It will still make that part of the image not as accurate, but at least I can take that feature out, right? Now I've got the real picture of what's out there, much better picture. Yeah, but not the real, because there's problems like that that are built into the fact of the resolution and how the actual camera and CCD works, right? How film paper works. Right now, it can only get rid of those by building a different kind of camera. But still, this is the crisp and clear version of what's out there as perceptible by this camera. Yay. But you can't ignore the raw data, right? You might have subtracted something to make your clear picture out of the raw data that's real data. And in fact, you for sure will, because whenever you do reduction of noise, reduction of error kind of processes, you will reduce the signal as well. Localized, a little area, the signal will get worse, right? It'll be blurrier, it won't be as accurate. You'll have had to scale up the data. Overall, it gets better because there was so much noise in that area, so much non-image, that removing it, in the net sum, it was worth it. But you can never throw out the raw data, right? So you've done something where, like, your will is in each frame, and having it in each frame, sometimes at night while you're meditating, you have gotten so many different perspectives on this, because each frame is a perspective on yourself, your will, your id or ego, that you've subtracted it out. And then you want to use a film strip where we subtract it out. And I'm saying, if you subtract that out, of course you don't see willpower in the film strip that you have that isn't willpower. And that film strip, when you watch the Michelson-Morley experiment, or perform it rather, it's just cold, and you performed it. Yes, it has been performed. The Michelson-Morley experiment. In reality, what really happened is you were doing it. You fumbled with the tool this time. Oh, you did everything great. No, I never fumbled with the tool. Actually, it was all that. However you experienced it, it's a film strip. If you did one thing first, another thing second, that all is the real experience. You subtract out all of that actual stuff to get another picture. Okay, I do that as well. But right now we're talking about an argument where you've made this second picture and said, I've got a mechanistic picture. There's no will in there. You cannot make me try to answer the hard problem of, why is this here when I want to talk about the reality over here where this doesn't appear. This doesn't appear in the reality I'm modeling from data that I got from here. I got the data from here and concluded this doesn't exist. You can't do that. You can't say the thing I got the data from doesn't exist because I reduced the data and showed the thing I got it from doesn't exist. Right? That's impossible. The place you got the raw data, it always exists. And if you found an argument where that can't exist, then the argument's wrong. You have reduced the argument to absurdity, because this absolutely has to exist. We know that. That's a fundamental principle, so we can use it in our logical arguments. And you get a theory where this doesn't exist because mechanisms, there's a problem with that theory, because this does exist. And the concept of mechanism is actually a concept about how different frames of this relate together. Right? Time is how these relate together. Physics is how one of these frames relates to the next frame, or the prior frame. Okay, and so, as I said, the theme of this too, I would like you to think about this, Hythloday. A less analytic, a more poetic philosophical point is, what is the effect of these ideas on people that need to exercise their willpower or could enjoy that, right? People who have low self-esteem, but because they've been abused, it's hard for them to assert their will. people who might have illness, a schizophrenic person who's hearing voices. And should they even bother to try to interpret those voices in a way that doesn't drive them to distraction? Or should they just say, well, whatever happens, happens. If I believe them and I do what they tell me to do, fine. If I don't, whatever. Does believing that you can make a difference help your life? Does it help other people around you? Does believing that you get to make a choice in life make you a better person or not? You get to make choices in life, and you're a kind of person, I think, makes choices, and you made the choice to be an honest and person, decent. Not everybody would like you. Not everybody wouldn't mind some of your habits, probably. But you've certainly made choices to be just, for example, as honest as you are, right? Those I know from my own experience and anecdotally observing the world through my life, that people that have done that have worked hard. They've exercised this muscle of their will that can get stronger. And ironically, it doesn't get more like Trump, right? It gets more forgiving and understanding. It understands its own failures enough that a strong will is not, it's a weak will that wants to brutalize other people or laugh at their misfortune and after inflicting the cruelty that caused it. That's a weak will that does that. Strong wills, in the sense of people that make choices, don't ignore the choice. This one has candy. No, don't ignore the choice. Take the real choice and say, I'm not going with the candy because I see how that's not really how I want my life to add up. And doing that honestly, and sometimes saying, hey, I get to take the candy. That's cool. That's okay. Maybe share you candy. Or don't. Hey, this time I don't need to share my candy. Everybody else has got enough candy. The point is, by making those choices, you actually seem to affect your life. Now, if you want to say that the poetic philosophical side of things shouldn't be at the table because it feels, just your feels, I will concede to that in the sense that, I put it as a separate category. Some people want to discard the whole category. I myself think that, again, since we're in this, and this is an emotional narrative, there isn't one of these frames that doesn't have an emotion going on at the same time, including calmness, serenity. Some of these things we think of being emotional, especially as when they're out of control, but every single one of these has something that could be called an emotion. So the poetic philosophy is an important part of philosophy. Things like, okay, I can't figure out whether there's determinism and free will. Can I figure out if my life is better acting on my will or not acting on it? All right, choose. Okay, I had an idea.